The fog seemed like a cotton veil, thick and immobile, enveloping the hill as if it were a living entity, breathing slowly to the rhythm of the icy wind. Matt Holloway parked his old Ford F-150 pickup truck on the side of a dirt road full of potholes. The location wasn't even marked, just mentioned by vague coordinates he'd found on an obscure forum about mysterious locations. As he looked at the hill, he felt a chill run down his spine, something he quickly attributed to the damp wind and the isolating atmosphere. Just one more job, Matt. A lot of photos, a good story, and goodbye, he muttered to himself, trying to ignore the oppressive feeling that place emanated. The town of Ravens Hollow was just a few miles away, but it felt like a world apart. When Matt had arrived the night before, he found a small, withdrawn community. The first person he approached, a gray-haired lady, simply shook her head and closed the door as soon as he mentioned Cursed Hill. Other residents reacted similarly, except for a man named Hank, the owner of a seedy downtown cafe. Hank, for a generous amount of money, told everything he knew. "No one has set foot in that place for decades, kid. They say it's cursed, that the very air there blows the life out of you. But if you're really going up there, pay attention to the markings. You'll know he's close," Hank said, emphasizing the word him without explaining further. Matt noted every detail, intrigued. He didn't believe in curses or mystical creatures. Their job was to expose what were often just exaggerated stories or collective delusions. That's what he did. He dismantled myths, used his camera to show what was real. But something about the way Hank was looking at him, as if regretting that he was already marking Matt next on the missing list, made his stomach turn. And before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now, let's get back to the story. Early the next morning, he drove to the base of the hill, where he had rented a tiny, rickety cabin. It was more of a shelter than a real house, with windows that didn't close completely and a roof that creaked in the wind. Still, Matt considered it a good starting point for exploring the area. He prepared quickly, organizing his photography equipment, a state-of-the-art camera, lenses for all occasions, and a sturdy tripod. He also carried a powerful flashlight, a pocket knife, and his inseparable notebook. That morning, while exploring the cabin's surroundings, Matt noticed that the nearby trees had deep scars on their trunks. There were long scratches, as if something with huge claws had passed through there. He took some photos, thinking maybe they were the result of bears or bobcats. Still, there was something peculiar about the symmetry of the marks, as if they had been made with deliberate intent. The silence around was oppressive. There were no birds, no buzzing insects, just the occasional sound of rustling leaves. The fog, which never completely dissipated, created strange shapes among the trees, as if something was moving stealthily. Several times, Matt felt like he was being watched. He stopped, looked around, but saw nothing but the dense forest and the misty blanket that seemed to swallow everything around. That same night, as he was reviewing the photos on the small laptop he had brought, something caught his attention. In one of the images that captured the markings on the trees, there was something in the background, an indistinct figure, tall and thin, that seemed to disappear as soon as the fog swallowed it again. Matt enlarged the image, but the resolution didn't help clarify what it was. He laughed nervously, blaming his tired mind for seeing things where there was nothing. Ghosts, monsters. I should start charging extra to deal with poorly told stories, he joked, closing the laptop. But that night, the sound woke him up. A slow, rhythmic scratching, like long nails tearing through wood. Matt sat up abruptly, his heart racing. He picked up the flashlight and looked toward the door. The sound was coming from outside. He hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity got the better of him. He took the knife and opened the door, lighting up the darkness. The flickering light revealed nothing but trees and fog. "It must be the wind," he whispered, although his voice sounded like an attempt to convince himself. Just as he was about to close the door, His eyes caught movement at the edge of the lantern light. He took aim quickly and saw something disappear between the trees, a shadow that seemed to move too fast to be human. Matt entered the cabin again and locked the door, now with the feeling that this story would not be so easy to resolve. The next morning, he decided to explore the hill itself. He followed a narrow trail that seemed never to be used. The fog was even thicker, and the silence was deeper. He found more marks on the trees, this time larger and deeper. Something about them seemed to tell a story, as if they were runes or symbols created by a primitive force. As he advanced, the wind began to blow stronger, bringing with it a sound that stopped Matt in his tracks. A low, guttural howl that seemed to come from all sides. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, as if the air there was denser, heavier. It was as Hank had described it. The air there blows the life out of you. Then he heard footsteps behind him, fast and heavy. He spun around, camera in one hand and flashlight in the other. There was nothing there, but the marks on the surrounding trees now seemed newer, and he realized he was no longer alone. Something followed him. Matt took a deep breath, trying to convince himself that the footsteps he had heard moments before were just echoes of his imagination. However, the feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. The fog seemed thicker, enveloping him in an oppressive blanket that muffled even the sounds of his own footsteps. He walked further along the trail, stopping every few meters to inspect the surrounding trees. Each one seemed to tell the same story. Deep marks, sharp claws, as if some giant predator had passed by countless times. The pattern of the marks began to look deliberate, as if they were part of a code he couldn't decipher. He took photos and wrote down details in his notebook, but the growing discomfort made him question his own courage. Halfway there, he found a small abandoned shelter, a structure made of worn-out boards and a rusty tin roof. The door was wide open, swaying slightly in the wind. Matt hesitated before entering, but his curiosity got the better of him. Inside, the air was heavy, damp, and permeated with a metallic smell. The ground was covered in dry leaves and dust, except for an area in the center where circular marks were carved into the ground, as if someone had drawn symbols there. He took more photos, feeling a strange urgency to record everything. As he inspected the place, he found something that stopped him in his tracks, a huge claw, longer than his own hand, attached to a broken piece of wood. He picked it up carefully, studying its texture. It was sharp and curved, looking more like it belonged to some kind of prehistoric predator than any animal he knew. Matt kept the claw in his backpack, although the thought of taking it with him made him shiver. When he emerged from the shelter, he noticed that the fog had become thicker, almost solid. His flashlight could barely pass through it, and the air felt even heavier. He moved forward, trying to ignore the growing sense of danger. It was then that he heard the sound again. A disturbing, rhythmic scratching, this time so close that it seemed to come from everywhere. "Who's there?" he shouted, swinging the flashlight around. The answer came in the form of a roar. It wasn't a human sound, nor something he could compare to any known animal. It was a deep, guttural sound that reverberated through the air and made every muscle in Matt's body tense. He began to back away, but the feeling of being watched increased with each step. On top of a nearby hill, something appeared through the fog. It was just a silhouette at first, but Matt still felt his heart racing. The creature was enormous, with a body that appeared hunched over, almost clumsy, but incredibly agile. His eyes, or what he thought were eyes, glowed an intense yellowish tone, standing out against the hazy background. Before he could react, the silhouette disappeared again, moving too fast for the flashlight to follow. Matt knew he needed to get out of there. He began to run back along the trail, dodging low-hanging branches and slipping on mossy rocks. His breath quickly became short. The heavy air seemed to want to suck away his energy. However, something forced him to stop abruptly. On the ground in front of him, there was a trail of fresh blood that hadn't been there before. It was thick, almost black, forming a trail that disappeared into the forest to his left. "No," "This isn't real," he muttered to himself, trying to regain control of his thoughts. Then he heard voices, faint, indistinct, as if they came from an impossible distance. He looked around but saw no one. The voices began to become clearer but distorted, as if they were being carried by the wind. Some words were understandable. "Go away! Danger! He is coming!" Matt felt fear rising, but also an uncontrollable curiosity. Who were those voices? Was anyone else there? Matt followed the trail of blood, convinced he could find something that would explain what was happening. The forest became even darker, and he had to light another flashlight that he carried as a spare. After a few minutes, he came to a small clearing, where the blood ended in a circle on the ground. In the center was the body of an animal, a deer or what was left of it. The carcass was torn apart, with marks identical to those he had seen on the trees. Around the animal, the same circular marks that were in the shelter he had explored before. Matt raised the camera to take a photo, but stopped when he heard a low sound behind him. He turned slowly and saw something that made his blood run cold. The creature was there, now completely visible. It was even more terrifying than he had imagined. A thin body, covered in what appeared to be a mixture of exposed skin and bone. Its yellowish eyes glowed with an almost hypnotic intensity, and its claws, the same ones he imagined had made the marks, gleamed in the flashlight light. He couldn't move. Fear completely paralyzed him as the creature slowly approached, each step accompanied by the sound of crunching leaves. When she stopped a few meters away from him, she opened her mouth, revealing a row of sharp teeth. The roar that followed was deafening, and Matt finally found the strength to run. He didn't know how, but he managed to get back to the main trail. He ran without looking back, hearing the heavy footsteps of the creature that was chasing him. His breathing was uncontrolled, and the world around him seemed to dissolve into fog and shadows. When he finally saw his cabin in the distance, he felt a wave of relief. He threw himself inside, locking the door and piling furniture against it. Outside, the creature roared again, but did not attempt to enter. She stood still, just watching, as if she knew the real terror was yet to come. Night fell over the hill, but sleep did not come to Matt. Locked in the cabin, he heard the sounds outside, footsteps that didn't seem to belong to a single being, but to several. The wind carried distant whispers, now clearer, as if the voices of the forest were getting closer. "You shouldn't be here," they said. "Come back while you can." Matt was at the edge of his sanity. He reviewed the photos on his camera, searching for answers. Among the images of the clearing and the marks on the trees, he found something that made him freeze. In one of the photos of the deer carcass in the background, the creature was partially visible, but there was something else. What appeared to be human figures, distorted by the fog, standing, watching. "This can't be real," he murmured, but deep down, he knew it was. The next morning, restlessness consumed him. He decided to look for Hank at the cafe. Maybe the old man knew more about what was going on. When he got there, he found Hank sitting behind the counter, playing with an old radio that was playing softly. "Ah, he's back," Hank said without looking at him. "I assume you've already seen something." Matt hesitated before answering. "I need to know more about this place, about what lives there." Hank sighed as if he had expected this. He pulled out a bench and motioned for Matt to sit. He looked around, making sure no one was listening. "What did you see?" "I can't say for sure." "It was big. He had yellow eyes, and the marks, the claws, were on everything," Matt said, feeling the weight of the words as he said them. Hank nodded slowly, his eyes lost on something in the distance. "That's not an animal, boy. It's not something you can understand. They say it is a guardian, but guardian of what? I don't know. Some believe it protects the hill from invaders. Others believe it is a punishment for anyone who dares to cross the line. What I do know is that no one who gets too close leaves unscathed." "And the voices?" Matt asked. Hank stopped. His gaze became serious. "Did you hear the voices?" "Yes." "What do they want?" Hank sat back in his chair, looking more tired than ever. They are not the voices of the living. They are those who came before you and did not return. They can't help you, Matt. They are trapped there, as part of the hill. The words made Matt's stomach turn. He had come to debunk a myth, but with each step, he seemed to fall deeper into an abyss of realities that he could not explain. Before leaving the cafe, Hank stopped him. "If you're going back to that place, take this." He handed Matt a small amulet, made of braided rope and small bones. "Maybe it won't help much, but it's better than nothing." Back at the cabin, Matt examined the amulet as Hank's words echoed in his mind. He knew he should leave, but something compelled him to stay. "I needed to understand. I needed to document." That night, while reviewing his notes, something strange happened. The cabin lights began to flicker, and the air suddenly felt cold. Then a loud knock on the window made him freeze. Slowly, he turned his head and saw what appeared to be a huge hand with long claws scratching the glass. But before he could react, the hand disappeared. Suddenly, a metallic sound reverberated throughout the cabin. Matt grabbed his flashlight and followed the sound to the front door. When he opened it, he found something that left him astonished. On the floor, a pile of bones carefully stacked, with a piece of blood-stained cloth placed on top. "Is this a warning?" he whispered to himself, feeling terror creep up his spine. Matt knew he needed to go to the heart of the hill, discover the origin of all this. Against all his instincts, he decided he would do it at dawn. The next morning, with Hank's amulet around his neck, Matt set out on his boldest exploration yet. He followed a trail that seemed almost unlit, marked by trees with deeper scratches. The feeling of being watched came back with a vengeance, but he ignored it. As he climbed, he found more signs, circular marks on the ground, like the ones he had seen before, but now interconnected as a pattern. He took photos, but a feeling of deep discomfort made him look over his shoulder every few seconds. Finally, he reached a clearing at the top of the hill. The place seemed to be the epicenter of everything. In the center, there was a tall, smooth stone covered in markings that resembled ancient runes. All around, the ground was covered in scattered bones, as if something or someone had brought their victims there. Before he could investigate further, the sound returned, that guttural roar, but now more intense, closer. Matt spun around, camera ready, but what he saw made him drop the equipment to the ground. The creature was there, fully visible under the fog that seemed to only lighten around him. It was even more terrifying than he had imagined. With a fluid and frightening movement, she approached, but before attacking, something strange happened. The voices. They were louder, almost deafening, but they seemed to be coming from inside Matt's head. The human figures he saw in the photos began to materialize around the clearing, like specters. The creature stopped, its yellow eyes now fixed not on Matt, but on the specters. One of the specters looked directly at Matt and whispered, "The choice is yours." Before he could understand, the creature attacked. Matt would need to decide, run or fight. Matt instinctively backed away, but his eyes remained fixed on the advancing creature. It was as if her every step made the ground vibrate, the fog around her writhing, as if obeying her presence. The specters that had appeared around the clearing remained motionless, their diffuse outlines illuminated by a pale light that seemed to come from within them. "The choice is yours," repeated a voice, this time clearer, almost gentle, but filled with something that Matt couldn't decipher. Terror made him hesitate, but at the same time, something inside him ignited. A desire to understand, to face what no one had been able to do before. He held tight to the amulet Hank had given him, as if it were his only protection. The creature stopped abruptly just a few feet away from him, its yellowish eyes shining like beacons in the darkness. For a moment, they both remained motionless, as if waiting for the next move. Suddenly, the creature raised its claws and roared again. The sound reverberated in the air, making the surrounding trees sway as if they were about to fall. Matt knew he couldn't run. The steep terrain and the presence of the specters made escape impossible. He picked up the camera from the ground, not to use it, but to throw it at the creature, a desperate gesture that made him realize how powerless he was. But something happened. When the camera hit the ground, one of the specters moved. He was a tall figure, with an indistinct face, but his presence was strangely comforting. The spectre raised a hand towards the creature, which immediately took a few steps back, letting out a low, cautious growl. Matt looked at the spectre, not knowing if it was an ally or something even more dangerous. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice coming out shaky. The figure did not respond with words, but made a gesture indicating the stone in the center of the clearing. The meaning was clear. He must come closer. Matt hesitated. He had no idea what could happen, but at the same time, he felt that the answer to the mystery was there. With cautious steps, Matt began to move towards the stone. The creature, still retreating, watched his every movement, growling low, as if ready to attack if he did something wrong. When he finally reached the stone, Matt noticed that the runes carved into its surface glowed dimly, pulsing in a rhythm that resembled a heartbeat. He reached out to touch the surface of the stone, but before he could do so, he felt a sharp pain in his head. It was as if his mind was being invaded by images and sounds. He saw flashes of people running through the forest, chased by something unseen. He saw the hill covered in blood, the bodies being dragged into the clearing. He heard the cries of despair, the pleas for mercy, and finally the whispers, "The choice is yours." Matt fell to his knees, his head throbbing. He realized he was seeing memories, not his own, but those of his previous victims. The stone was a record, a silent witness to everything that had happened there. When the visions finally stopped, he looked up and saw the specters again. They were clearer now, and their expressions were one of pain and despair. One of them approached, pointing to the amulet around Matt's neck. He understood immediately. That was the key. The amulet was more than an object of protection. It was a connection with what was left of humanity in that place. Matt held the amulet tightly, and with courage he didn't know he had, placed it on the surface of the stone. A deafening sound filled the clearing, and the surrounding fog began to swirl violently. The creature roared in fury, charging forward again, but was stopped by an invisible barrier that seemed to emanate from the stone. The clearing was filled with intense light, and for a brief moment, Matt felt as if he was suspended in time and space. Then the voices spoke again, but this time in unison. "You choose to free them, or take their place." Matt froze. He understood the meaning. The specters were the souls of previous victims, trapped there to appease the creature. If he freed them, he could condemn other people to be persecuted by that thing. But if he chose to take their place, he would be stuck on the hill forever. "No, it can't be," he said, his voice trailing off. The creature growled louder now, its form beginning to change, as if it was reacting to the impending decision. The specters looked at him with empty eyes, but there was a silent plea in their postures. They wanted to be freed. Matt knew there was no easy answer. He wasn't a hero, just a man who wanted to debunk a legend. But now it was clear. This legend was real, and he was at the center of something much bigger than himself. With one last look at the creature, the specters, and the stone, Matt made his decision. Matt closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision he needed to make. Everything around him seemed suspended, as if time itself was awaiting his choice. The creature was motionless, but the guttural sound it made vibrated in the air, as if anticipating the outcome. The specters remained silent, but their presence seemed to press on him, asking for release. He opened his eyes, staring at the stone. Its surface glowed more brightly now, and the amulet in his hand seemed to pulse in sync with the markings. Matt knew he couldn't run away. Any attempt to escape would be futile, as the hill would not let him leave without a resolution. "Whatever," he murmured, decided. With shaking hands, Matt lifted the amulet onto the stone and pressed it against the glowing runes. The effect was immediate. A shrill sound, almost like a scream, echoed across the clearing, while a burst of bluish light spread throughout the space. The creature roared, now in uncontrolled fury, and charged at Matt, but before she could reach it, she was stopped by an invisible force emanating from the stone. The force threw him back, but Matt managed to get up quickly. He noticed that the clearing was changing. The light from the stone illuminated the environment, partially dispelling the fog. The specters began to move again, approaching the stone as if they were attracted to it. The creature, in turn, seemed torn between attacking Matt or protecting what it considered its domain. It was then that the voices of the specters sounded together, clearer than ever. "He needs to be stopped. Finish what you started." Matt felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know exactly what it meant to finish what he started, but something inside him led him to act. He held the camera, now lying at his side, and aimed at the creature, not to capture an image, but as an improvised weapon. He fired the flash repeatedly, temporarily blinding the monster and gaining a few precious seconds. The creature roared, retreating momentarily, but soon returned with more ferocity. His claws came within inches of Matt's face, leaving deep marks on the ground. He stumbled backwards, almost falling onto the rock. At that moment, he noticed something. The runes glowed more brightly when he was close, as if they were reacting to his presence. He understood that the stone was not just a symbol, it was a tool, a catalyst. The amulet in his hand was the key, but he needed to activate it completely. Without thinking twice, Matt placed the amulet in the center of the stone and, with all the strength he had, pressed it against the marks. The clearing was filled with an explosion of white light. The creature let out a deafening scream, not of fury, but of pain. Matt was thrown back again, feeling the heat and energy of the stone pass through his body. When he opened his eyes, he saw that the specters were falling apart, their nebulous forms slowly dissipating into the air. The creature, now staggering, seemed smaller, less threatening. His yellow eyes, once bright and full of hatred, were dull. She tried to move forward one last time, but fell to her knees. It was then that Matt realized the monster was dying, and with his death, the hill also seemed to change. The fog began to lift, revealing the sky above for the first time. The remaining specters looked at Matt one last time before disappearing completely. But before the last of them left, he said something Matt would never forget. "Thanks. Your choice freed us." Matt fell to his knees, exhausted but relieved. He felt like the weight he had been carrying since arriving in that place had finally been lifted. The silence that followed was almost deafening. There were no more roars, no more whispers, just the sound of the wind passing through the trees. But then something caught his attention. The stone, now cracked, still gave off a faint glow. And in the center, where the amulet was, there was something new, a small golden object, glowing softly. He approached carefully and picked up the object. It was a small key-shaped piece, intricately decorated with the same symbols that were on the stone. Matt knew his journey wasn't over. The key in his hand seemed to vibrate slightly, as if it were connected to something much larger than that hill. He looked around for the last time, feeling that this place had finally found peace, but deep down, a question remained. What did that key really mean? He walked down the hill, tired but determined. When he arrived at the cabin, he gathered his belongings and got into the truck. Looking at the top of the hill in the rearview mirror, he saw that the fog had completely disappeared. But something in the shadow of the trees seemed to be watching him leave. As he drove back to Raven's Hollow, one thought consumed him. Perhaps the true story was yet to be discovered, and now he had the key to begin the next stage. When Matt crossed the borders of Raven's Hollow, the silence inside the truck was as thick as the fog that had enveloped the hill a few hours ago. The golden key rested on the bench beside him, and his mind worked incessantly, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He had freed the trapped souls, faced a logic-defying monster, and lived to tell the tale. But what did that mean? And why did I feel like this was just the beginning? The city looked different. The air was lighter, and the usual oppressive stillness seemed to have lifted. Still, Matt didn't stop. Stopped briefly at the gas station on the way out of town to refuel and get something to eat. There, he found Hank, who was leaning against his truck, calmly smoking. "Well, you're still alive. I don't know whether to congratulate him or be surprised," Hank said, raising an eyebrow when he saw Matt. Matt stopped in front of him, not knowing where to start. He took the golden key out of his pocket and showed it to the old man. "What is that?" he asked, hoping Hank would have an answer. Hank took a long drag on his cigarette, eyes fixed on the object. "So you found her," he muttered, almost to himself. "That explains why you're here in one piece." "Explain what?" Matt asked, frustrated. "What the hell is that key? What happened up there?" Hank looked at him with a mix of pity and respect. "No one knows exactly what the hill is or what is there, but there are those who say that the key is proof that you have been accepted, that the hill, or whatever controls it, recognized you as worthy." Matt frowned. "Worthy? For what?" Hank shrugged. "That's something you're going to have to figure out on your own, kid. But I'll tell you one thing. No one ever came back from there with that key. Whatever you did, you changed the rules of the game." Matt didn't know how to respond. He put the key in his pocket and said goodbye to Hank. As he drove down the road that would take him back to civilization, the old man's words echoed in his mind. He knew he couldn't just forget what he had experienced. The hill was more than a cursed place. It was a portal to something much bigger and older, something he was now connected to whether he wanted to or not. Back at his home in Seattle, Matt began organizing his photos and notes. The images of the markings on the trees, the runes, and the creature were clear, but those of the specters were blurry, as if they couldn't be captured completely. He thought about publishing the story, but something stopped him. Showing that to the world didn't feel right. It was as if revealing the hill's secret could cause unpredictable consequences. As he reviewed his photos, he noticed something he hadn't noticed before. In several of the images, the golden key appeared subtly, even when he was not holding her. She seemed to be present all the time, as if it were a part of him now. That night, Matt had disturbing dreams. In the dream, he was back on the hill, but this time, he was not alone. There were other figures by their side, all holding similar keys. They were facing a gigantic door carved in the rock, with the same runes he had seen in the clearing. When the door began to open, Matt woke up, panting, with the feeling that something was about to happen. One day, while walking a bookstore for inspiration, Matt found an old and dusty book in the occult section. The title was The Guardians of the Tickets. Flipping the pages, he found an illustration that made his heart accelerate. A stone with identical runes to those he had seen on the hill. Below the illustration, there was a description. Those who receive the key are chosen to protect the balance between the worlds. The price is high, but the responsibility is higher. Matt closed the book, feeling a mix of fear and purpose. He didn't completely understand what he meant being a guardian, but he knew his life would never be the same. The key was not just an object, it was a call, and he would need to decide how to answer him. Months passed. Matt sold his home and disappeared from social networks. Some friends reported that he had begun traveling in remote places, always with his camera and a notebook. No one knew for sure what he was looking for, but those who knew him well suspected that he had something to do with what he experienced on the hill. On a cold, lonely night, while camping in an isolated valley in the Colorado, Matt sat around the fire, holding the golden key. The sound of the wind between the trees reminded him of the hill, but now, instead of fear, he felt determined. He knew that there was still much to be discovered, and somehow felt that the hill was not the only place like that. As she looked at the key, she shone slightly under the firelight, as if alive. Matt smiled. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he was exactly where he should be, on the threshold of a new mystery, ready to find out what was beyond the next door. Matt's camp, illuminated only by the shy glow of the fire, was surrounded by almost supernatural silence. The sky above was a tapestry of sparkling stars, but he barely realized his beauty. His mind was attached to the golden key in his hands, a small artifact, but with an invisible weight that seemed to grow over the days. Since leaving Ravenous Hollow, Matt felt it wasn't the same. It was not only the surreal experience that had changed him, but also what seemed to be a growing connection with places he never visited before. It was as if his mind was being pulled by invisible wires, leading him to remote, isolated places where the modern world had barely left his mark. In the months that followed his departure, he crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and plunged into dense forests. In each place, he found signs, rock marks, symbols carved on tree trunks, and occasionally inexplicable views that appeared on the edge of his peripheral vision. He wrote down everything, trying to set up a puzzle that seemed to expand every time he joined a piece. During one of his expeditions north of Alaska, Matt met an archaeologist named Margot Keller, who was investigating an ancient ice-covered ruins. Margot was skeptical by nature, but something in Matt's seriousness made her hear her story. When he showed the golden key and the pictures of the hill, she was silent for a long time. "Do you know what that means?" she finally asked, passing her fingers through the runes recorded on the key. "Not completely. That's why I'm here," Matt answered, watching her carefully. Margot sighed, removing from his backpack an old map. "There are records on these marks on Nobody legends. They talk about portals between worlds, protected by guardians who are often not human. Some believe that these places connect Earth to something larger, something we cannot understand." Matt felt a chill, but kept his calm. "Have you seen something like this before?" Margot hesitated before answering. "No, but there is a place where these brands appear often. It is in the far north, on an island covered with eternal ice. It's risky, but it may be what you are looking for." Matt knew I had to go. Being failing Margot, he left with the coordinates in hand, determined to discover more. The northern trip was the most challenging Matt had ever faced. Cold winds punished his face as he advanced through treacherous terrain, carrying his equipment and the golden key, now attached to a chain on his neck. When he finally arrived on the island mentioned by Margot, he found a desolate but impressive landscape, steep cliffs surrounded by frozen waters, and in the center, a cave whose walls were covered with runes similar to those of the hill. Inside the cave, the temperature dropped even more, but Matt barely noticed. The key on your neck began to vibrate slightly, as if it reacted to the proximity of something. He followed the marks on the walls until he reached a circular room. In the center was a pedestal similar to what it saw on the hill, but much larger. The runes shone weakly, pulsating like a heart about to awaken. When Matt put the key on the pedestal, the whole cave trembled. The brightness of the runes intensified, and a portal began to form, a whirlwind of lights and shadows that seemed to lead to another world. The same feeling he felt on the hill came back in full force. The choice. But this time, there were no spectra. There was no creature. Only the void and the promise of something beyond. Matt hesitated. He knew that crossing the portal meant leaving everything behind. But he also knew that his life had changed irrevocably from the moment he set foot on the cursed hill. There was no return. He took a deep breath, stepped toward the portal and, with one last look at the world he knew, crossed. What he found on the other side was beyond understanding. A vast, bright energy field where space and time seemed to merge. Impossible structures floated in the air, and indistinct figures, similar to the hill spectra, moved by the place. Matt felt a shiver, but also a strange peace. He knew he had entered a kingdom where the rules of reality did not apply. The key on his neck now shone intensely, as if he was at home. Matt realized that his journey was not just to discover secrets, but to protect the balance between these worlds. He didn't know what was waiting for him, but for the first time, he felt exactly where he should be. Months later, in Ravenous Hollow, Hank looked at the hill, now devoid of his characteristic fog. He knew Matt had gotten something no one else had. Deep down, I hoped he was still alive, although he knew that the young man would never return. From time to time, walkers and explorers reported visions of a lonely man, always on the borders of the unknown, carrying a camera and a golden shine in the chest. They said he was never in a place for a long time, but always left the feeling that something important had been protected. And so Matt Holloway's name became part of a new myth, the man who not only survived the cursed hill, but who crossed the boundaries of the impossible to protect what no one else could understand. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support our work. See you in the next video.